Good morning, everybody. It's September 11th here at 9:30 in the morning. Welcome to the California Restaurants Care Wellness webinar. And we've got a great panel here today. Just some quick housekeeping issues or pointers I want to mention, and I'll hand it over to Alicia. But you have the ability to ask questions during the webinar today. Please put them in the chat and we'll do our best to handle those on the fly today. And the webinar is being recorded, so this will be available after today. I think the follow-up email will be going out on Monday. If everything goes well, we can get that out to everybody and the additional resources and everybody's contact information. So it is being recorded. The resources will be made available later. And with that, I'll hand it over to Alicia, the Executive Director for the California Restaurant Association Foundation.
Thank you, Anthony. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining us this morning. We're honored that you're devoting an hour to this important topic and subject, and we hope that you walk away with tools and information that's going to be of use to you. Again, special thanks to Anthony, who is on our foundation's board of directors, and to Alicia, who is joining us with United Health Group as a sponsor. I'd just like to acknowledge that today is a solemn day and that 19 years ago we had the 9/11 attacks on our country, and I'd just like to honor those who passed away and the heroism of so many to get us through that terrible time. And speaking of challenging times, today certainly is one, and many types of mental health issues exist, and living through a pandemic can aggravate and worsen things like substance use and thoughts of suicide. So then you add on that we're in an industry where so many are essential workers and facing the public and facing job loss and fear. So it's been a tough time, to say the least. So today we have three experts that are going to share valuable information, and we hope then tools for you and knowledge to help you identify the signs of a crisis and know where and how to get help. So with that, I'd like to again thank United Health Group for making our wellness webinar series available. Oh, let me step back for one moment, sorry, Alia, and just mention a little bit about our foundation. So we are the charitable arm of the California Restaurant Association, and we change lives through restaurants. And our three pillars are scholarships for college, and youth programs where we work with high school culinary arts programs for career exploration and training, and to lessen the achievement gap for so many students across California. And then Restaurants Care, which is bringing this webinar to you today. Restaurants Care is our relief fund for restaurant workers in crisis. And more information about Restaurants Care can be found at restaurantscare.org. So with that, I'd like to, again, acknowledge and thank United Health Group and turn this over to Alicia, Director of Programming, for a few words. Alia?
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you all for being here today. As many of you know, we're really proud to be a longtime partner of both the National Restaurant Association and the California Restaurant Association, offering exclusive programs and solutions that are available to you just for being a member. What you may not know is that in the past year, we've really transitioned to become more of a partner in wellness for you and your employees. We now offer a variety of solutions to help you stay healthy and be well. Those include virtual visit options for only $7 per employee per month. That gives your employees access to unlimited virtual visits with zero copays. We've got at-home testing kits, including COVID test kits. We've got a free prescription discount card program that saves the average family $300 a year, and a variety of mental health programs and solutions. Many of those mental health programs and solutions are free and low cost, and mental health has been and will still remain a huge priority for us and through our partnerships, especially with the California Restaurant Association Foundation. So all of these programs and solutions are available on the CRA website. We're going to send you a link afterwards, but just want to thank you for being here and thank Alicia for having us today.
Thanks, Alia. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. What we're going to do is have each panelist share some information. If you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, which is being monitored, and we'll do our best to make sure we answer all of your questions. So first, I'd like to introduce Stephanie Ballard. She's a PhD and substance use subject matter expert for Each Mind Matters, California Mental Health Services Authority. And Sandra Black, whose video wasn't working this morning, but she is here and she'll be sharing some great information. So Sandra Black is a suicide prevention subject matter expert, also for Each Mind Matters, California Mental Health Services Authority. And we have Jared Hidman. He's a Vice President of Community Development for LivingWorks Education, Inc. And with that, I will turn it over to, I think, are we starting with Stephanie and Sandra?
Thank you, Alicia. So my name is Stephanie. As Alicia mentioned, I provide technical assistance and subject matter expert on addiction for Each Mind Matters, California's mental health movement. So as some of you may be aware, September holds National Recovery Month as well as National Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. Really, this is a time in which organizations, communities, people throughout the world place a special focus on celebrating recovery, spreading hope, and bringing attention to prevention efforts. As someone who works in both the substance use and suicide prevention world, the month of September has always held a special place in my heart. I really thank all of you for showing up today. I also have over 10 years of experience working in the restaurant and service industry. So I truly know firsthand that this is an industry that's no stranger to the effects of mental health and substance use. And these two topics that we're talking about today, so substance use and suicide prevention, are very much so intertwined. There's a high comorbidity as well as shared protective and shared risk factors among the two. My colleague Sandra and I, again, are thrilled to be here today on behalf of Each Mind Matters to bring light to these topics and really provide you all with meaningful and tangible ways in which you can incorporate substance use and suicide prevention efforts into the restaurant space. So I'll pass it over now to Sandra, who again's video is unfortunately not working, to provide you a quick introduction into the Know the Signs campaign.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you so much for having us on here today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Know the Signs campaign, and hopefully some of you are familiar with it, but if not, you will be shortly. The Know the Signs campaign is a social marketing campaign with the goal of changing behaviors through increasing knowledge of warning signs, willingness to have the conversation with someone you're concerned about, and awareness of resources that are available to help someone that you're concerned about. And the cornerstone of the campaign is our website, and the URL of the website is suicideispreventable.org. So that's all one word, suicideispreventable.org. The site has 3 sections, and I'll just talk very briefly about each of them because they match up to the 3 big goals of the campaign. The first one is Know the Signs. The Know the Signs section lists all the warning signs of suicide, and when you click on the warning sign, a pop-up bubble appears that provides a little bit more details about the warning sign, like how you might recognize it, what specific types of things you might hear or see. And there are also different subsections of warning signs that talk about some specific warning signs for teens and older adults. And really those are warning signs that are a little bit more commonly seen in different groups. The Find the Words section provides information and tips for having the conversation with someone you're concerned about. So similarly, the Find the Words sections has bubbles, and when you click on the bubbles, tips and suggestions will pop up that will for what to say and to some degree what not to say as well, just sort of different types of words or phrases to avoid. And finally, the Reach Out section compiles state and county resources that can help someone who might be thinking about suicide, and they can also help others who are concerned about someone and really just want to talk to a counselor about their concerns they're having and what to do. So the Reach Out section, again, it has some statewide resources, and then it also has drop-down menus for each county where you can see local resources by county. And the last thing I'll mention about that is that the Know the Signs campaign has been around for a few years now, and it was evaluated by the RAND Corporation, and it found that the campaign is really effectively meeting its goals. So I'll now turn it back over to Stephanie to talk about the intersection between substance abuse and suicide prevention.
Thanks, Sandra. So as I mentioned a moment ago, the topics of substance use and suicide prevention are very much so intertwined. Specifically, what the research has found is that suicide and really suicide attempts are significantly affected by substance use. Now, when we dive into this a bit further, what we found, and perhaps maybe some of you have experienced, is that individuals oftentimes will turn to drugs and alcohol as really a solution for managing symptoms such as anxiety and depression. And this is especially particularly true for individuals when there's no other coping mechanisms are known or are sought out. But on the other hand, again, as some of you may have experienced, the use of substances can also trigger or worsen underlying or co-occurring symptoms such as anxiety and depression. I think what a lot of people don't understand about alcohol and drug use is that prolonged use can actually change the chemical makeup of our brains, not just in the short term, but the long term as well. So for example, alcohol is a commonly known depressant. And what this means is that it affects our natural level of happiness chemicals like serotonin and dopamine. And what this means is that although you may feel an initial boost the night before, again, some of us may experience this, the next day you'll be deficient in those same chemicals, which may lead to heightened anxiety or decreased mood or depression. And what the research has really found is that people who heavily drink are more likely to suffer from depression. On the flip side of it, alcohol dependence is roughly 3 times more likely among those with depression. So in both scenarios that I just described, so using to manage symptoms of anxiety and depression, as well as using and anxiety and depression increasing, we have the risk of suicide possibly increasing as well. And it's also really important to note, and as some of you who may drink or have used drugs before, there's often a level of disinhibition that occurs when an individual is intoxicated. You start feeling a little loose, you start to ignore some of those social norms, and you add that on to someone who's already struggling with suicidal thoughts, and there's a significant risk for suicide. Statistically speaking, again, I think suicide has actually been found to be the leading cause of death among people who misuse alcohol and drugs. And now in the suicide prevention and substance use world, we often speak of protective factors and risk factors. So protective factors being things that mitigate or eliminate risk of substance use and suicide. And on the other hand, risk factors being things that place an individual at a disproportionate risk of substance use and suicide. Now, when we look at the two topics that we've been talking about today, they really do truly share a lot of the same protective and risk factors. So example, shared risk factors being family conflict, peer rejection, relational, social, work, financial loss, and then shared protective factors being trusting relationships. This could be good relationships with colleagues, even a manager, coping skills, the presence of employment in their life, involvement in community activities, and really just strong social bonds. And you might be thinking, okay, why are all these things important to us in the restaurant industry? Well, we truly believe that if those of us in positions of leadership or helper roles or even peers are aware of the overlap between these risk and protective factors, we can then implement prevention efforts that really help to reduce risk and enhance protective factors. So now to shed light on why, again, this is all so very important for the restaurant industry, I'll pass it back to Sandra.
Thanks, Stephanie. So we're here today to talk to you because mental health and substance abuse and suicide risk are of particular concern for the restaurant industry. And I'm probably not saying much to you that you don't already know about from your experience. So a recent survey of over 2,000 culinary workers nationally found that 94% reported having current or past mental health issues. 3/4 of them reported having multiple mental health conditions. the most common ones usually being depression and anxiety. Most pointed to the stigma of mental health conditions and the lack of access to behavioral health care as major barriers to getting help for these problems. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration has also reported that food service and accommodation workers had the highest reported rates of a past year substance use disorder of any industry included in the study, and that rates of illicit drug use were rising. And the CDC's reported that this industry has the 11th highest rate of suicides of occupations that were included in their study, and that this rate has also been increasing over recent years. So several factors might contribute to these statistics. Again, getting back to what Stephanie mentioned about risk factors and protective factors that we know that can be related to suicide. Restaurant work is often, as you know, characterized by irregular hours and high pressure, stress, fast pace, and physical demands that can lead to injuries or chronic pain. And alcohol is abundant, it's readily available, and it seems common that people would be blowing off steam using alcohol or other substances. Many don't have health insurance, or access to behavioral health care can be very limited. And there can be a culture of valuing toughness and holding up under the strains of the work. And many in the industry may have concerns about whether, if they admit to or get help for their problems, will this put their career in jeopardy? And this acts as a big barrier for people who need help from seeking it. And the impact of the pandemic on the restaurant industry has been massive. Most restaurants have had to significantly change how you do business, and too many have had to close their doors. And in addition, people have lost jobs, people have lost the businesses they've been building up over many years, or that threat is there, and it feels often like the end just isn't in sight yet. So the hardship, the uncertainty of the times is very likely leading to behavioral health challenges among those who may never have experienced them before, and it's likely to compound risks for those who are already vulnerable. So that's enough about the problems, right? So what can you do? Well, one of the things I'd like to talk to you about today are some strategies that for suicide prevention that were developed with the idea of workplaces being a key setting for suicide prevention. So at the national level, the Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention partnered with many industry leaders to develop what's called a comprehensive blueprint for workplace suicide prevention. So I will just go through a few of the basic parts of the model, and maybe suggest a couple of ways that those could be integrated into the restaurant workplaces. So, and then you could always follow up with me if you have more questions about this or would like to learn a little bit more. So one of the really important parts of it is leadership, creating a supportive environment where it's okay to ask for help and it's encouraged to ask for help. And this is really often set by leadership, and this can be the owners, the managers, the shift supervisors, people who are influential and have some authority in the space, who are talking about mental health and suicide, who are willing to talk about it, who create some kind of create a place where a space where it's okay to ask for help, and that it's not that it won't be tolerated. And screening is another one, and that can sound like a strange word, or it can sound like an intimidating word rather, but really screening is about a way for people to assess how they're feeling and to sort of keep tabs a little bit on their feelings and what they're experiencing, and whether that might be tipping into problem areas, or whether just helping them to assess where they're at. And in some environments, it can be a way to sort of take the temperature of things. So it's anonymous, it's confidential. For example, in the I Got Your Back campaign, they developed a note card system, sort of a coded note. I don't know if it was color coded or if it has something on it where at a glance it sort of indicates your general mood or how you're showing up today, and that gets put anonymously in a box. And then you can kind of look at that and say, how's the kitchen feeling today? It's like a lot of people are coming in really stressed, and that can really influence how the rest of the shift goes and how we interact together when we know a lot of people are on edge. But you have to have ways to really know that stuff, and that's what screening is about. Services and resources. So Services and resources, again, so whether or not behavioral health, which refers to mental health and substance abuse, whether or not behavioral health coverage is available, whether there's health insurance, the workplace can really be a way to connect with what is available in the community, really putting the effort out there to know. There are some 24/7 crisis lines like the Suicide Prevention Lifeline that are awesome resources, and there's a lot of ways that that can be communicated with posters, brochures, things that you have in the environment that you're just saying, hey, help is available. And by putting out there promotional ways to promote those resources and making sure your staff know about them, you're communicating that it's okay. I encourage you. I really, if you're feeling stressed, if you're feeling suicidal, use these resources. And when you promote them, that's the message that you're sending. So whether it's crisis lines or AA groups or whatever local services are available that can be supportive. Suicide prevention training is another tenet of the blueprint, and training is recommended at least for sort of leadership. So managers, shift supervisors, whatever your infrastructure is, people who are kind of in charge in a particular shift, really having some extra training on knowing the signs of suicide and how to help someone who is in trouble. And ideally, that could be available for all staff, but at least starting with those who are sort of in a position of authority in the workplace. Promoting supportive social networks. So Stephanie mentioned risk and protective factors. One of the strongest protective factors against suicide that we know of are strong social connections, the sense that you're supported and that you have people that you can talk to when you need support. So how can you promote strong social connections? Well, so this can include some of the work-related or team-building activities that are just allowing people to interact in ways that are very low stress and less formal than they have to interact on the floor when the kitchen's open and service is happening and it's really stressful. But it would be, if you do these kinds of things that just allow people, even if it's just short periods of time, to connect with each other in an unstressed way, it just needs to be something that you do as part of the shift. So it's not something that they're required to do on their own time, or that's asking more of them, creating any kind of a burden on people who may already be pretty stressed. And also another way to promote supportive social networks is to create a buddy system. So buddy system would be, having groups of 2 or 3 people who are sort of extra, got each other's back. They're really looking out for each other. They check in together a lot. Hey, how you doing today? Hey, I noticed this. So people who really feel like they have an extra layer of support in the workplace. And this can also be peer support systems where people, another way that this is, the social networks are promoted are through the having someone each shift who's like a staff person who's really well liked. Everybody kind of knows them. They're friendly with most people in the kitchen. They're trusted people. Bring them aside and say, hey, would you like to be our go-to person? If someone's in trouble, they know they can talk to you. And then you provide those staff people with training and supports so that they don't feel like that they feel confident that they would know what to do if one of their coworkers came to them and said, hey, I'm thinking about this, or I've been having these problems. And this can be really effective as well. And when these types of systems are put into place, usually the person who's the go-to person, not only do they receive the extra training and support, but they also have something that they wear. So whether it's a ribbon or a button or something that visually sets them aside as, hey, that's my go-to person. That's right, I have that person to talk to. So all of these are different ways to enhance the social connectedness that really can help protect people against the distress. So crisis management, policy, and means restriction. That's a big category, super important. And really what it boils down to is having a plan in place. What happens in a crisis? What happens after a crisis? Most of us have been through these situations at various times, and when you don't really have a plan in place, there's a panic and it creates trauma. But if you know what to do, then it really helps you to sort of concretely step through these really challenging times. The crisis can be something that happens at the workplace itself, or it could be something that happens off-site, but it involves a staff person or someone close to them, or maybe a regular customer. And it can be a tragedy, it could be a suicide death, it could be a suicide attempt, or a mental health or substance abuse related event. Anyone who's dealt this is familiar with how paralyzing it can be. So having a plan with clear action steps created ahead of time when things are okay and kept up to date. They should include consideration of what needs to happen, who needs to be contacted, and an opportunity for staff to debrief and come together to support each other, and also maybe organize ways to support others who are impacted. The last two I'm going to talk about are education and social marketing. Education is really creating opportunities for staff to develop what in jargon we would call behavioral health literacy. So a little education, what are mental health conditions? How do I know when what's normal stress and strain is dipping over into something that I need to be worried about and I really need to get help? Similarly with substance use, how do I know when what I'm doing is okay for me and when it's tipping into a problem point? So that literacy, understanding a little bit more about behavioral health, and suicide as well. So Suicide Prevention 101 is a presentation that we often provide in our team, and it's really just this overview of what is suicide prevention. And it's basic, but it's good information, and it really helps people. Again, the more people hear these things talked about, the more they have a chance to explore them, the more we're really addressing that stigma, that taboo around those issues, and breaking down those barriers to seeking help. So education is also about not just problems or what can go wrong or how to know when things are wrong, but how to stay healthy, how to keep yourself, how to enhance your protective factors. And these can be related to physical health, mental health, coping skills, problem solving, just ways that you can support people to really bolster up the parts of them that promote resiliency and things that can really help them to weather storms. And education can be however it makes sense. I mean, in some workplaces, it might be having events, or it could be as formal as a presentation or a talk or a brown bag. In some settings, it might just be more like maybe whatever venue you use to share information and to communicate with your staff. It could be word of mouth. It could be really quick little ways that managers talk to staff during meetings, or things that we discuss during meetings, bringing in people from the community who can talk for 10 minutes about some of this stuff. Or it could be social media, like if you communicate with your staff or they communicate with each other in social media or email, or however the communications happen, that's the points at which the opportunities for education are there. And similar with social marketing. So social marketing, as I mentioned in the beginning, Know the Signs campaign is a social marketing campaign, meaning it's about changing attitudes and behavior through consistent messaging. It's this is what goes beyond education. It's education with a purpose to actually change attitudes and behaviors. So organizing a campaign in your workplace setting, really tying all of this stuff together. In a little bit, Stephanie's going to talk to you about some of the resources that we have that can really help you design a campaign. So Each Mind Matters and Know the Signs are both campaigns that have these type of goals, and we have resources available. If you wanted to go with this, we can work with you to really pull together all of these different things and create a lot of impact. And the final thing I'll say is I've talked a lot about all of these different strategies in the workplace blueprint, and it can seem like a lot. This blueprint is based on comprehensive programs that have actually been shown to reduce suicide risk in certain settings, like the Air Force setting and in to some degree the healthcare settings, which are also working on this. The workplace blueprints being implemented in the construction industry, which has the highest rate of suicide of any occupation in the country. So it's a really powerful tool. You don't have to say, well, before I can do anything, I'm going to be ready to do it all. So you can look at it and say, you know what, what's feasible for us right now is maybe something in here and something in here, and go for it. Implement that stuff. The comprehensive approach is ideal, where you grab strategies from each of those areas and do them together in a coordinated manner. And maybe one day that becomes possible, but in the meantime, you do what you can. And the blueprint really gives you a chance to pull up on some strategies that we know have some evidence behind them.
And Sandra, if I could jump in really quickly, I just shared the link to the blueprint Stephanie shared with me. I put that on the chat function, so that's out there.
Awesome.
And, you know, from my perspective, I'm an employment lawyer helping companies comply with the employment issues. And, you know, it does involve some of these mental health issues sometime, you know, with the litigation or situations in the workplace. And, you know, especially during COVID-19, the resources you mentioned are great. And who in the company do you is ideal to implement some of this? And maybe Stephanie's going to get to that here in a minute. But would that be the HR person? And then, yeah, what kind of resources and how do they start on top of, you know, trying to comply with all the other leave laws and just keep the company out of trouble legally, and then, you know, to have this whole extra huge responsibility too, you know, how does it fall on one person? Is it a couple of people? How have you seen that work?
So it really depends on the workplace. I mean, I know that's not a great answer for you, but if you're a workplace that's large enough that you have an HR department, you might even have an EAP, you might even have, you know, many levels of management and executive leadership, then, you know, it starts with whoever finds out about this and says, hey, we need this. And then you work through whatever channels you have to get it there. Maybe you have to run it up the flagpole all the way. We have you know, we developed some materials a few years ago that include a short pitch, for workplace suicide prevention. So if you were a staff person or a mid-level manager and you wanted to do this, you thought it was really important, this was your pitch. You were going to show why this is really important for us to do. And that was one thing I would definitely say. If you're sometimes I think executive leadership and management can have that attitude, like I think you alluded to a little bit, of yet another thing, and this is such a big responsibility, and it's so you know, it's like there's this attitude of, if we start doing this, then we're opening the door to problems. But I can tell you the problems are there, and if you don't do it, they're going to get worse.
Right.
One of the biggest things about having mental health and prevention in the workplace is you are supporting your staff and making them healthier and giving them reasons to be able to show up for work and really feel a part of something. So again, it's the whole prevention argument of in the long run, it costs a lot less to do these things than it does to allow the crises and the tragedies to accumulate and just react to them, or worse, not react to them. And I think that what we're going through right now with the pandemic is only making that a sharper distinction. We really need to take care of each other. And one of the things I think I neglected to mention in the beginning was, again, why workplaces? Because 70 or 80% of all suicide deaths are among people who are working age adults. That is where the biggest suicide risk we have in this country. It's not teenagers, it's not who you might think, it's working age adults. Most of them are going to work somewhere. Workplaces are a key setting. There's my soapbox. You can't see me, but I'm standing on it.
Great.
Thank you.
We're going to turn it over to Stephanie. Were you going to talk a little bit about some resources, or do we have time, I hope?
Yes, we have a few minutes for some additional resources, then we want to make sure we get to
Yes.
Jared. Stephanie, did you have a couple of resources to add?
Yes, I do. And one thing that I did, I think is really super important, based on my own experience, but I also don't think that my experience was unique in the sense. I think that in the restaurant and service industry, a lot of the opportunities for social connection involved alcohol, 9 times out of 10. So I think one of the simplest but most impactful things that we could do as leaders in the restaurant industry is create opportunities where not drinking is somewhat normalized. I think that it just opens the door for people who might be struggling to start to adopt some of those healthy behaviors, as well as people who don't feel comfortable drinking, to adopt some as well. But yeah, I'll get to the resources. So one of the largest goals for us today was to leave you with some substantial things that you could use to initiate substance use and suicide prevention into your workplace. So every single year during Suicide Prevention Month, Each Mind Matters and the Know the Signs campaign, we put together a suicide prevention kit for local and community activation. So this year we placed a special emphasis on the intersection that we've been talking about, as well as developed some resources specifically for you guys. Some to help spread the word about suicide prevention, some to reduce stigma, as well as some to help implement those practices. So Restaurants Care, I believe, will be sending out a follow-up email today to participants with different pieces of that kit, but I really do urge everyone to check it out. We have social media posts with pre-written captions, in-person and virtual trivia games, which is perhaps something you could host at your restaurant or with staff, as well as general suicide prevention posters that could be put up in places where employees congregate. We're also hosting a Facebook Live event on Each Mind Matters Facebook page titled 86 Suicide in the Restaurant Industry. This will be a panel that talks about reducing mental health stigma, strategies to support people that are struggling. It's September 21st from 2 to 3. And if you're interested in joining, you can RSVP at Each Mind Matters Facebook page. Again, thank you all for showing up today. It's truly inspiring, and thanks for having us.
Thank you, Stephanie and Sandra. Great information. And as Stephanie pointed out, and Anthony earlier, we will share all of these links and resources in our follow-up email. And on our website at restaurantscare.org, we do have a section under mental health where you can find some of the things that were mentioned earlier today, like the I Got Your Back program. Thanks so much. And now we're going to hear from Jared Hidman with Living Works. We're very fortunate at Restaurants Care that we've partnered with Living Works and their Living Works Start program, which is a training on identifying the signs of someone who's in crisis and how to point them in the direction of health. And I went through the training. It's only about an hour, hour and a half online. And it was really just practical information and gives you sort of the words to use to try to help someone. And so if I can put a plug in here, if you use a unique link that is dedicated to Restaurants Care, the training is only $20 an individual, and $5 from that goes back to support Restaurants Care. So thank you to Living Works for making us a part of that important program. And now, Jared, we'd love to hear more about Living Works and Living Works Start and that training that's available and what you have to offer. Take it away.
Yeah, thanks so much, Alicia. I really appreciate the plug. If I can real quick just do a time check. Do you want me to make sure that I leave space for questions at the end? So should I look to be done by 20 after the hour? I just want to make sure I'm not trampling on questions.
I think 20:25 after the hour will be good. Yeah.
Perfect. Right on. Thank you. So that sure was a nice plug. I appreciate that, and I'm so glad you got to interact with our training. I also want to acknowledge and thank Stephanie and Sandra for all of the work that they've done. I'm familiar with the Know the Signs campaign, and actually I live just outside of Denver, Colorado, and for 10 years I directed the Colorado Office of Suicide Prevention. And you know what you do as a state employee is you borrow and sometimes steal from other states and other great resources, and absolutely Know the Signs is one of those that we leverage often. So kudos for the great work on that. About a little over a year ago, I transitioned from the state of Colorado to Living Works, which is an international suicide prevention and intervention training organization. We are one of the world leaders in providing suicide prevention training, where we really focus on teaching skills for how to recognize and intervene with folks who are suicidal. My job with the organization is to support associations, organizations, and communities in taking a community development approach to suicide prevention. So how do you frame integrated, comprehensive suicide prevention into a setting where you're maybe not familiar with, comfortable with, or have prioritized suicide prevention, and really support folks in doing that, not only with Living Works training, but more broadly with suicide prevention in general. I also have to say, like Stephanie, I spent, gosh, at least a decade in the restaurant business, from high school through graduate school, and for a little while post-graduate school. And as I was listening earlier today, I had this memory that kind of struck me and I hadn't thought of for a while. Between undergraduate and graduate school, I was bartending at a restaurant in my hometown, and a former classmate of mine, who I knew was married to another classmate of mine, she was in the bar, and of course I was busy, and we just were shooting the breeze very briefly. And she told me that that her husband, who was also a former classmate of mine, had died by suicide. And I was kind of paralyzed with how to respond, because it shocked me, for one, and I was getting crushed at the time. And so all I could do is give her a hug and wish her well. And I didn't have the skills to know that, gosh, I could have maybe followed up with this woman and checked in with her and made sure that she was okay, and just offered her some support and resources beyond what I could just do in that moment. And that really struck me as that's why not only do you have to have this comprehensive strategy that Sandra and Stephanie described, but you have to present people with the skills to be, and the comfort level and the confidence to be able to talk about suicide, because suicide is incredibly complex. And a part of that complexity is that many of us, because of a variety of different reasons, are terrified to talk about it, or we believe that it's not our business. And so you can't just tell people, hey, you should talk about this and you should be comfortable with it. That awareness piece is really important, but you also have to provide people with some tools and some skills and some practice to learn how to ask a really, really hard question, which is, are you having thoughts of suicide? And so that's part of what we provide. That's not part of, that's the majority of what we provide at Living Works in our training. And so Living Works Start is our newest product. It's about 18 months old. We have been very fortunate. This 35+ year company has always been based on in-person training. And we just fortunately recently transitioned into the online training platform. And so Living Works Start is our answer to online training. Part of why I joined Living Works is because I was so blown away by the quality of the Living Works Start program. All of us have, I'm sure, taken online trainings, whether it's around cybersecurity, other types of safety, sexual harassment training, many online trainings. They're so often didactic. You put them on the side, you focus on your email. It's hard to pay attention online. And what's really cool about this training is it's interactive. It requires you to practice the skills that you are being taught in a variety of different formats. And so that's what's really exciting about it. And you can do it online by coming back. You don't have to do it in one 90-minute setting. You can come back to it. The first time I took Living Works Start, I did it in 3 30-minute runs, and it worked very well and was interactive. The other piece that I think is relevant for the restaurant industry is that the reach that you can have with online training, whether it's Living Works Start or another training, you can train people at different times and in different settings, and they can work at their own pace. And I know Sandra talked about policy and system change, and I really think the restaurant industry is a place where that type of system change could have a real meaningful impact on suicide and suicide prevention, because not only of the demographic that restaurants tend to employ, young people, as Stephanie detailed, people who often you connect at restaurants. I certainly know my personal experience was that I've never made better friends outside of high school than I did while I was working in the restaurant industry. And I've been a professional for 20 years now. Not any of my jobs, pardon any of my current colleagues, have I been as close to the people I was as I was at restaurants. But we also drank together after every shift, and that's how we socialized. But it's such a great opportunity because connectedness is such a great protective factor if you connect and if you connect in meaningful and healthy ways, and you have access to the public. As a bartender, so many regulars, usually single men, who came in and sat at the bar and ate and drank sometimes a lot. And so that's the opportunity to use those skills with your customer base as well, which is critically important. And so I think for restaurants, that's part of why it's so important. And I encourage you to just be thoughtful about that. And I know that both Stephanie and Sandra have the time and the capacity to support you in developing those strategies. My team certainly has that capacity as well. There are lots of people doing really great work in suicide prevention. And so I think that's critically important. And the other thing that we focus on at Living Works, because we have a suite of trainings, both in person and online, is that we believe that everybody has a role to play in suicide prevention. Not everybody has to be or should be a psychologist or somebody who provides therapy. Everybody can learn to recognize someone who's struggling. Everybody can learn how to ask a person if they need help, if they're feeling suicidal. And all of us can learn to be good, empathetic listeners. And I mean, restaurant people, you make money by being a good listener and by being responsive and by connecting with your customers. So this is just one added layer. I don't know that you'd have to use these skills all the time with your customers, but you certainly not only would use them with your colleagues in the restaurant, but where you play, where you live, with your families, with your peers. And so these are skills that go beyond just your workplace. And so I think that's an important note to make as well. And I also just before I turn it back over, I want to acknowledge and thank the California Restaurant Association Foundation for their generous support and access to their network of 13,000 plus culinary students and 20,000 members in support of our California Youth Summit that is taking place next Tuesday at 1 p.m. We have this really cool partnership with the California Department of Education to train middle and high school students, including those culinary students, and staff across the state in Living Works Start. So the summit next week is really designed to encourage and empower students in particular to take Living Works Start. So this youth summit is about hope. It's about resilience. It's about connectedness. And during this time when everybody, including students and teachers, are feeling isolated, can't connect in the classroom and in person, they're learning virtually, there's no more critical time to really start to focus on these efforts. And September is the right month to do it. Suicide prevention, in my opinion, because this is my career, is a 12-month priority, and the data suggests that it should be a 12-month priority. And this is a public health battle that we have to fight and that we have to win. And so every industry has to help out. And I think your willingness to dive into the fray of this conversation and to really talk about it is laudable. So I really appreciate the time and the opportunity to talk with your organization.
Thanks, Jared. I have a question for you. Could you just quickly give some examples of some of the questions that, I think having the tools to know how to facilitate, be part of a conversation when you see a friend who's down, you see a friend who might be drinking too much or, struggling. What are the first things you say to approach that subject? I think I always find I need to have the words in my head. It's like muscle memory, right? So that I can know what to do in a situation.
Yeah, thanks. And so I think that's part of what all of our trainings and every suicide prevention training is about, is to give you opportunity to know what to say and what to ask and how to do it. The bottom line for me is there's not necessarily a right way. Engaging and willingness to engage in the conversation is the right thing to say. And it's uncomfortable and it's hard. And the other really important key is that you have to then be a listener. I think too often we our tendency is to talk people out of their problems. Like, oh gosh, you have so much going for you, or, well, geez, you have so many friends. Like that, they're not thinking that way. If they're having tunnel vision or in a suicidal crisis, they may be thinking that all these people around me are going to be better off when I'm gone. So you may be listing for them their reasons for dying. The key is a willingness to ask the question. We believe that you have to ask the question incredibly directly. You can't say, are you thinking of hurting yourself? Because to Stephanie's point, that could be after my shift, I'm going to go out and get hammered. That's hurting yourself. We need it to be really specific about suicide. And that's what Living Work Start really walks you through, is what to look for and how to engage in that conversation. And the reality is, if you ask the question and somebody's not suicidal, they're going to tell you, but they also now know that you're someone that they can talk to about a hard subject. So you're also somebody they can depend on. And so that's the key. I mean, I think it's the same thing as we talk to parents about talking to kids about sex and substance abuse and wearing their seatbelt. Talk to your kids about these same hard topics as well.
Great,
and
thank you.
Your colleagues.
Okay, so I do have a question here in the chat. Let me just take a moment to ask it. What is the question that you asked? So someone wants to know, like, what is that that direct question? Can you give us that direct question, an example?
Yeah, it's simple for me. Are you having thoughts of suicide? And there's some, there can be some backgrounder to that. Like, gosh, Jared, I kind of noticed you're showing up at work late. You seem like you're maybe either hungover or just not engaged, and you seem kind of down. And I just know sometimes people who are experiencing changes in behavior like that are having thoughts of suicide. Are you having thoughts of suicide?
Great. So that's the direct question. Are you having thoughts of suicide? And what if someone says yes? This is another question that's just popped up. So the answer is yes, I am.
Yeah, so again, that's what our training is all about. But the simple answer is zip it and listen and be empathetic and supportive.
Okay. And then do you refer them to an organization or a suicide hotline? I think I saw, like, you could put their number in your phone, and then you can text them the number to the suicide prevention hotline or something like. Would you recommend that kind of a next step as well?
Yeah, and I'll let Stephanie and Sandra talk about local California resources, but the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They are trained suicide intervention experts, and so that's the resource that I tend to use, but there are also local resources.
And Jared, thank you. This is Sandra. I wanted to chime in and say to what you're saying about the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and just very quickly, it is a national line. However, it's important to know that it actually routes you to a local crisis center. So we have, I lost count, 11, 12, 13, what is it? Like, Stephanie, I don't know if you remember. We have a number of accredited crisis centers here in California that are members of the Lifeline. So just it's a great resource to promote because it's a unified number, but it sends you to local or regional services.
Fantastic. Okay, so that's a good follow-up. And then I suppose it's also checking in on that individual and making sure that they are still doing okay, or they're getting through the crisis. Really good practical information. So thank you, Jared, I appreciate it. As we're winding down our time together, I thought I'd ask each of you, we have about 5 minutes left, to share what is the most important thing you want people to walk away with after attending this webinar. Sorry, I'm springing this on you, but I think you're all, I think you'll be easy to pull something together. And so I'll start with you, Stephanie.
Sure. I think for me, and I think a lot of the prevention efforts, one of the biggest messages that we want to get across is that really anybody can make an impact. Anyone can, get involved in these efforts. Anyone can help. Yeah, I think that's always a message that stuck with me that I want to promote, that I think is also really inspiring. It's just, anybody can make a difference.
Fantastic. Yes, agreed. And you've given us some good reasons why and how. And Jared, I'll go to you next. How about you? What's the one thing you think is important that people walk away with from this webinar?
Honestly, I'll say ditto and merely add by saying this isn't brain surgery. You can learn these skills relatively quickly and easily. The most challenging part is having the confidence and, quite frankly, the courage to step into the fray with somebody who you know might be struggling.
Yeah, so true. Thank you. And Sandra, how about to you?
I think the one thing I hope you'll do is go visit our website, not just promoting that. It's a great resource. Suicideispreventable.org. And then everything that Jared and Stephanie said for sure. We can do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a big first step is being a part of today's webinar, because destigmatizing this conversation is really key, and making it okay to ask questions and to talk about this, and then to make resources available should the subject come up. And we want to make sure that everyone on this call and webinar has access to those very important resources and trainings that can make a difference and quite literally save a life. So Anthony, thank you for hosting us this morning and facilitating the conversation. Thank you so much to Alia and United Healthcare for providing some free resources and important available tools and apps and all kinds of wonderful things. And then to Stephanie Ballard, Sandra Black, and Jared Hindman, thank you for being our experts and sharing really important information. Again, we will be sending out a follow-up email with important links. You can always turn to restaurantscare.org, and we will do our best to point you in the right direction if we don't have the information readily available on our site. And to all of you joining us, please have a good day. Take care of yourselves, and thank you again for joining us for this webinar. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.